The problems of college football in modern times are not particularly new or even novel, yet it was a decision not made more than 30 years ago now that would have forever altered both the sport and college athletics. That would be Division 1 AAA. This was a proposed classification of Division 1 where all of the football teams would be of the non-scholarship variety. Essentially what the Pioneers would go on to become, except they wouldn't be forced to play alongside scholarship teams. They would have their own distinct championship, their own distinct rules from the rest of Division 1. Division 1 AAA is one of college football's bigger what ifs, because in the early 1990s there were quite a few, not just Division 1 AA sides, but Division 1 sides who were floundering, struggling to keep up in college football's ever worsening arms race. A financial arms race, of course, that's only worsened with time. A college football subdivision under the Division 1 banner with no scholarships, no spiraling costs. It would have saved so many football teams. It would have revived other programs. And it would have changed the sport for the better. Of course, Division 1 AAA never happens, and it never happens because back in 1991, there were some folks who were, well, yeah, they were bugging out.
Yo, microphone check 1, 2, what is this?
Let's hear it for the 91 college football season.
No need to sweat Arsenio to gain some type of fame.
I got a bone to pick with you, Arsenio.
Let's sit down.
Oh, I'd never forget that player's name. Never. He was first. Number 14.
Drink a lot of soda, so they call me Dr. Pepper.
Never underestimate the doctor. Feet.
Mother's last creation, minds get flooded, ejaculation.
JR's Judgment Day. Dallas, trust us, it ends with a bang.
But you still don't know the half. I sport New Balance sneakers to avoid a narrow path.
Come with me if you want to live.
This college football season, your teams score on Prime Sports.
Not the best, not the worst, and occasionally I curse to get my point across.
And I say, no shit, your legs. You got a 2,000-pound goddamn crane on it.
I tell you this much, riding on the train with no dough sucks.
Remember to buckle up that chin strap for 92.
The NCAA convention of 1991 was known as the Reform Convention. However, the largest reform was a mandate that all Division I teams who had football sides that didn't play in a Division I classification, that weren't D1 or D1AA, that happened to be playing in Division II or Division III, needed to move those football programs into the ranks of Division I. Or in other words, all schools needed to have their sports playing at the same level their football team was. As that mandate was passed, so too was a resolution that stated a vote the following year on what would become known as Division I AAA would take place. This was something that had been mentioned a few years prior to any of this going down, D1 AAA, and the idea was simple. It would be a Division I football subdivision of schools that didn't award football scholarships. The idea was appealing, perhaps even the ideal solution for a lot of Division I schools who liked having all of their other sports in D1, but didn't want the cost associated with having football at the highest level. More importantly though, with D1 AAA, you not only got a level playing field, but you got the ability to control other costs that were spiraling out of control in D1 and D1AA. Things like the number of coaches on any given staff, spring practices. There were just a lot of expenses football was beginning to occur around this time. Even with the prospect of a D1 AAA vote on the horizon, the next 12 months for those schools not in compliance with the new NCAA mandate was chaotic. A side note here, I do understand why D3 schools were eager to have Prop 53 passed. It was not super cool that a school like Dayton that had large facilities, a larger enrollment, that had a bunch of advantages, dropped their football team down to Division III, won some national championships, and still got to have their basketball team feature in the NCAA tournament or the NIT. There were also Division I schools that didn't feel like this was a particularly fair arrangement either, and I also understand their viewpoint here. And let's be honest though, At this time in college football history, Division I AA in particular is an extraordinarily burdensome endeavor for a lot of schools. The limit for scholarships in 1A in 1992 was 95. This number was still 70 for D1AA. Coaching limits were 9 full-time staff for D1 and 7 for D1AA. Now, you did not have to meet the maximums in either classification, by the way, but it really created a very unfavorable playing field for a lot of those schools who couldn't keep up with the upper echelon schools. Yet at the same time, some of these D1 schools with their football teams in D2 or D3 weren't exactly doing gangbusters down there. Dayton was the exception, not the rule. Initially, the formation of D1 AAA is seen as a formality, more or less. There aren't any huge objections to it. It's not something that a lot of folks view as being this huge thing. In total, only 26 schools were actually impacted by the NCAA decision for those D1 schools who had football programs that weren't D1. And even then, not everyone was exactly in lockstep on what path they would choose. As 1991 does carry on, we do get some more clarity as to what exactly Division I AAA would look like. Not only is it going to be non-scholarship football, but several other guardrails are put into place to prevent costs from getting out of control. There would be 10 regular season games. There's going to be no spring practices or spring ball, and there were also limits placed on how many coaches each school could hire, as well as off-campus recruiting. But as the details of Division I AAA become more public, more teams start to become interested in joining the ranks of this classification, especially on the D1AA front, because, well, quite frankly, it just made a lot of sense financially. And to understand that, let's talk a little bit about Division I AA in 1991. It kind of sucks. It is the place no one ever really wanted to be. And it's the place no one ever wanted to be from the day the NCAA first formed Division I AA. Big schools just wanted to siphon off more TV money, and that initial go around, everyone was like, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to drop down a level so you can enrich yourselves. And then 1982 comes along, and the NCAA just forces a whole lot of schools down into D1AA. That's a whole other story, but like even after that 1983 influx of schools who were kind of forced into Division I AA, it's never really beloved. No one really wants to be there. It's just sort of like, hey, we don't have any other option. Worse though is it's expensive, and it keeps getting more expensive. And this is why D1 AAA was so attractive to a lot of schools, kind of like just surviving, or at least trying to survive, the life of a D1 AA football school. Major D1 programs needed $3 million or so annually to operate. Fielding a fully scholarshiped and staffed Division I AA side was still costing you more than $1 million per year. The estimated annual cost of running a Division I AAA football program, that was anywhere between $150,000 and $300,000. The cost savings here would have been significant. Importantly though, it really needs to be viewed through the lens of who wanted to join this new Division I football subdivision. It wasn't these schools who were powerhouse programs with tens of thousands of fans selling out their stadium each week. For a lot of these universities, they just had students who wanted to come to their school for academic reasons and play football. And they wanted to be able to offer that without getting caught up in the rat race that Division I and even Division I AA football had become by the early 90s. There was also a very strong desire to not lose Division I status, which was important because it unlocked revenue from the men's NCAA basketball tournament, as well as continuity with conferences, because that was still kind of a thing at this point in time. It wasn't just D1 AA schools thinking about making this switch. The talk of Division I AAA kindled interest in several schools who had either disbanded their football programs or had never fielded a football team to begin with, that this would be the avenue they needed to have football at their university. You also had teams like Evansville beginning to make plans for the future as a Division I AAA school. This wasn't unusual. So the idea, the concept has some momentum behind it already, and then it receives a boost in August of 1991 when the NCAA Council said it is going to sponsor this new football classification. Just as everything seems to be aligned in the right direction for Division I AAA, a weird trend begins to emerge. The entire idea of this non-scholarship football at the Division I level, it gets labeled as cost containment football. In some corners, the term is used positively, but more often than not, the phrase takes on a negative connotation from those who are against the D1 AAA proposal. It's sort of like, oh, how dare you not want to bankrupt your school trying to field a football team? And as I said earlier, the cost for trying to put out a football team for a lot of colleges has gone well beyond what they're comfortable with or can even afford financially. The rift this creates is noticeable, perhaps nowhere more so than the Ohio Valley Conference, where there are two sides trying to essentially determine the fate of the conference. You have the pro D1 AAA side that kind of wants everyone to move that classification, and then you have Middle Tennessee State University and a few others who are like, no, we need to stay Division I AA. As the year progresses and we get into late December with the vote shortly upon us, the approval of Division I AAA is seen as still mostly a formality. Even critics of this are kind of resigned to the fact that, yeah, it's probably going to pass. An informal straw poll shows it is favored across all three divisions. That is very important to take note of, because for a proposition to pass within the NCAA, it needs approval not from a majority of schools, but from each division, D1, D2, and D3. So a majority of schools in each division must approve the measure. Everyone knew D1 AA schools were not happy about AAA. The reasoning, though, was all very self-serving, and they were saying, well, you can come play Division I AA, but you don't need to have scholarships or coaches or all of that other stuff. It's optional, and while, yeah, that is technically true, it's still ridiculous. It's ridiculous to come out and say, yeah, you can come compete with us, even though we both know you don't have the same resources to come compete with us. Just an absurd thing to do. However, as the calendar flipped to 1992, it was another group that actually held the fate of Division I AAA in its hand. And as it turned out, Division II, they had the votes. The 86th NCAA convention holds a vote on that D1 AAA proposal on Thursday, and it fails to pass in Division II. Division I and Division III give it the green light. Schools seeing their only way, their only real hope of keeping football alive, slipping away right before their very eyes, get to work. They start lobbying behind the scenes, and eventually these efforts get another vote put on the agenda for the following day. It lost again in Division II. The results were worse the second time around. So what happened? I guess you could say basketball happened somewhere in the final months of 1991, and very quietly, the NCAA puts in a clause that states schools couldn't move from Division II to Division I AAA, and they did so at the behest of the big schools who didn't really want to share the revenue that was generated by March Madness. A flood of D2 schools moving on up to Division I would create more conferences, which would mean that pie would get divvied up even more. By limiting D1 AAA to schools that were already Division I, it made sure that no extra revenue would need to be split. Knowing this, those Division I schools didn't have to play bad cop and vote down the measure, so that's why it passes in Division I. While the D1 AA schools still weren't happy with it and they still voted against it, it does clear D1. Division II schools, on the other hand, well, they took exception to being locked out of Division I AAA. Instead of voting to help these schools that needed a place for their football team in Division I, they decided that they were going to do the most American thing possible, that they were going to vote down the proposal, because if they can't have something, then no one can have it. There is talk of the Division I AAA proposal being revisited at the next convention the following year, but nothing ever materializes on that front. And, well, you know the rest of the story from here. People absolutely love blaming Title IX for the death of a lot of college football programs in the 1990s and 2000s. Here's the thing though, Title IX didn't vote down the Division I AAA proposal that a lot of those schools needed to survive. D1AA programs lobbied against it, and it was Division II schools that voted against it, and they voted against it for no other reason apart from the fact that it didn't benefit them. The thing is, college football in the early 90s was getting entirely too expensive. The real cost of a college football team wasn't the extra expenditures in women's sports that were required because of Title IX. And even back then, the requirement is that 31% of state funds directed toward an athletic department went towards women's sports. But with football, it kept expanding, and it wasn't just the scholarships, it was the extra coaches, it was the need for extra facilities, it was the need for equipment, it was the travel. There is so much money that was needed not only back then, but today to run out a college football team each week. And for a significant number of schools, those expenses were never, ever going to be offset by ticket sales or donations, and certainly not by TV revenue, which was kind of non-existent for small schools at this time. A women's cross-country team or a women's tennis team was a low-cost endeavor. One coach, some cheap uniforms. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. You could operate 6 to 8 women's sports teams in the Division I athletic department for $600,000 to $800,000. A Division I AA football team or a low-end Division I football team, they were losing $400,000, $500,000 annually. As it relates to this story though, those schools that had it good in Division I AA that weren't losing that much money, or maybe they were even breaking even, they didn't ever understand or appreciate the plight of those Division I schools that had their football team in D2 or D3. They just saw this as an opportunity to force others to join their ranks because no one wanted to join Division I AA through their own volition. It was from D1 AA schools, this was a scenario like, oh, sweet, well, you have to join us now. And I mean, yeah, some did. Several would get out of the college football business altogether over the next decade, though. And make no mistake, those next 5-10 years are extraordinarily difficult for a lot of schools. You know, some of the ones that decided to just quit football. It didn't make any financial sense, but even the ones that plowed ahead, that tried to make it, it was really tough sledding. Both Sacramento State and Cal Poly rack up major football debts in the 90s as they try to forge a path as a Division I AA school. The saddest part of Division I AAA being rejected, at least for me, was the fact that there were schools that had either disbanded football teams previously or who had never had football teams or hadn't had football teams in decades who saw Division I AAA as their opportunity to jump back into the pool. From UC Santa Barbara and Long Beach State to Winthrop and UMBC, there were a bevy of schools who wanted Division I AAA to be a football school again. This has nothing to do with Title IX and everything to do with a collection of schools acting out of their own self-interest. I suppose that is college football's grand tradition after all. Of course, the Pioneer League does form under the Division I AA umbrella, but this is not an apples to apples comparison. When you have a loose affiliation of schools that don't offer scholarships, that's way different than an entire subdivision of Division I football where there are no scholarships. As for those Division II schools that voted against the D1 AAA proposal, what an extraordinarily short-sighted, selfish move on their part. Let's be frank here. There was absolutely no way how the NCAA had built the proposal for Division I AAA, barring them from joining. There was no way in hell that was ever holding up in any court of law. Even then at the time, it made absolutely no sense. There was no legality behind ring fencing an entire category of Division I athletics. It just wouldn't have worked. But those D2 schools just didn't have the foresight to understand that. So what would Division I AAA have looked like? We knew there were programs who needed to play in that there was going to be anywhere between 20 and 30 schools who were already committed. And I think it would have been a popular option for a lot of Division I AA schools who were just facing cash crunches and needed a solution. I can't really ballpark a number here for you, but it wouldn't have been this small collection of schools. There would have been 40 plus, I think, at the very least. It would have also allowed Division I AA or FCS to serve as an actual middle ground for schools that wanted to provide scholarships without necessarily getting into that FBS grind of huge sums of money. It would have been that either you're no scholarship, you're 80, 90, 100 scholarship, or you can split the difference. That's what Division I AA would have been, which is good for schools like the Dakotas and the Montanas. There are lots of schools that could have still used FCS. I doubt any big conference schools would have moved their football programs from Division I to Division I AAA. I mean, would you have seen maybe some of those big West schools? Fullerton was a prime candidate to move to Division I AAA, and maybe that's how their football team sticks around. By and large, though, I don't think you see a lot of meticulation down. There may have been 1, 2, 3 schools in Division I in the 90s that did decide to go non-scholarship football, but it wouldn't have been this mass exodus, at least early on in those first few years. But what I always come back to is there were so many schools in the 90s and 2000s that didn't want to get rid of football. They just wanted it to be cost effective. And the way to make that cost effective was to have non-scholarship football at the Division I level. It certainly did not make any sense to drop all the other sports from Division I to Division III. And quite frankly, the Pioneer League just wasn't a viable option. That was really supposed to be this Midwest collection of non-scholarship schools that were playing Division I AAA. Now, that's not what it evolves into down the road, but that's what it was set up. It was set up as a Division I AAA conference. At the end of the day, Division I AAA would have saved a lot of football playing schools, particularly on the West and East Coast, where it was seen as the solution to a problem for a lot of schools. Now, that solution never comes around. The thing about Division I AAA, though, is that it wouldn't have been a cure-all for everything that ends up plaguing college football down the road. Does it stop conference realignment? Probably not. Does it stop all the greediness and just terribleness that has come out of the woodwork in present day? No, it's not the savior for everything. But the college football landscape sure as hell would have been more vibrant. There would have been more opportunities for players and coaches and the like. All things considered, college football would at least be a slightly better place with Division I AAA in modern time. But in modern time, it of course wouldn't be called Division I AAA. We have FBS. We have FCS. I guess D1 AAA would be FDS, football. It doesn't matter, but you get the idea. So here's to you, FDS. Oh, what you could have been. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to know more about the, I don't want to say long history, but the interesting history of college football in Alaska, check out the video in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And for the story of Portland State's absolutely ridiculous run where they scored 90 some odd points, lost, and then scored 105 points in 3 consecutive games, that'd be the video in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Until next time, I'm Shine Hollis, and this is The Touchback. And hashtag take it out to the 25, yeah.